Buckminster Fuller. So that book, Critical Path, came out in 1981. I was then 21. I was just finishing up college and about to enter a career on Wall Street. And, he seemed to me to be commensurate with a lot of the punk thinking at the time. He's a punk scientist and a punk engineer. And what I mean by that is it's all about do it yourself. Just do it yourself. You don't need outside, legitimacy. You don't need accreditations. You don't need approval. You don't need the status quo. Just really probe your own mind. And there's so many rich things in your own mind. So two things that really stood out for me. One, of course, you mentioned money and his thoughts about money and thinking about money. The other thing is that his organizing principle, or one of his organizing principles, and he gives some anecdotes about his life, about how he decided at one point that he would not do anything unless it benefited humanity as a whole, talking about energy, money, and things like that. So those are the two antecedents, I would say, in thinking philosophical wise, where we can get into the Bitcoin's design. But his separation of the state and politicians from money, and to take it from a design perspective, and to have his attitude, which again has that punk sensibility of essentially just do it, you don't need through a system. Well, I do have a patent on a virtual currency that's from 1996. So the Keiser patent, U.S. patent 5950176. It's a virtual specialist patent, how to trade virtual currencies, virtual securities with a virtual currency. So that's what I patented. So when I heard about Bitcoin in 2011, it was a leap beyond what I was thinking about, because all the virtual currencies and digital currencies up until then were centralized to some degree. All market making, all federal banks, all political considerations regarding money are all centralized. So the thing about Bitcoin that breaks it from everything else is that it's decentralized. And how do you create that decentralized network? And I think it's interesting because, again, getting back to Buckminster Fuller, a lot of his writings, you look through it through a political lens, you would say this is not capitalism. This is something else. This is maybe the opposite of capitalism, and yet the result are tools that enable those who could call themselves capitalists to do fantastic work as capitalists. But there are a lot of elements to this post-internet age. Like we have the free open source software movement. You have Linux, which is essentially free software. You have Richard Stallman was big in his idea of free unlicensed software. The Lawrence Lessig's work with the Creative Commons license, which is outside of the trademark and patent system. And during the early part of the internet age, there was this tremendous, and you would appreciate this, and you were there as well. You had the work of those who considered the internet to be really a revisitation of the 1960s and the free love movement, and those who were taking drugs and hallucinating, Timothy Leary and those folks. There was a moment in the internet's history before it became completely corporatized, where there was this feeling of freedom of expression that was going to be this huge movement. And our friend who wrote the Declaration of Independence for the Internet, I'm looking at Stacy now. Yeah, John Perry Barlow. He was incredibly huge, at that time. And then the internet became completely corporatized. And it wasn't until Bitcoin came around that we had a new chapter in this idea of distribution and decentralization and individual empowerment and individual journeys. And, I always compare Bitcoin to shamanism and kind of spiritualism and things like this, where people have the freedom to delve into their own spiritual journeys because they have unconfiscatable money that's never debasing in value. So they have no worries. In other words, you achieve individual sovereignty and you can just pursue spirituality. And I think that's where Bitcoin is heading. I think everyone ultimately achieves individual sovereignty, the whole idea of wealth changes dramatically itself. I mean, this would be a Buckminster Fuller idea, that his idea of wealth was very, very radically different than what most people consider to be wealth. So if you take that and if Bitcoin is the coin of his thinking, and then what do you have? If you had everyone thinking like Buckminster Fuller, the world would be a dramatically and drastically different place. And with Bitcoin, we can get to that place, and we are getting to that place, and it is happening right now.